Welcome to On Factum. Today, we look at the most expensive real estate deal in human history. A deal that some call a joke, and others, a geopolitical necessity. In August 2019, the global media was flooded with a story many dismissed as a bizarre reality show stunt. The President of the United States had reportedly instructed his advisors to explore the possibility of purchasing Greenland from the Kingdom of Denmark. A diplomatic scandal followed immediately. Copenhagen was stunned. Nuuk, the Greenlandic capital, responded with a mix of defiance and irony. "We are open for business, but we are not for sale." January 2026, history seemed to repeat itself. Once again, the global media was flooded with a story many thought was left in the past, but it was back. The President of the United States reportedly revisited the idea of purchasing Greenland, and this time, the tone was different. However, to the students of history and geopolitics, this was far from a joke. It was an echo of a forgotten proposal from 1946, when Harry Truman offered $100 million in gold for the same island. Even further back, in 1867, the U.S. State Department commissioned a report suggesting that Greenland's strategic position and its vast resources were essential for the security of the North American continent. In the world of high strategy, Greenland is not just a massive, desolate ice sheet. It is 2 million square kilometers of the most expensive and dangerous vacant lot on the planet. Why today? Why now? Why are Washington, Beijing, and Moscow willing to risk global stability for an island inhabited by fewer people than a single medium-sized sports stadium? Today, we deconstruct the anatomy of the battle for the Arctic, a conflict where geography, climate change, and survival collide. To understand Greenland, one must stop looking at the land and start looking at the water. Specifically, the high seas of the North Atlantic. Geopolitically, Greenland is the northern pillar of the GIUK gap. This is an acronym for the sea lines between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom. During the Cold War, this was the most monitored stretch of water on Earth. It is the only gate through which the Russian Northern Fleet based in the Murmansk region can reach the open Atlantic. If Russia wants to threaten U.S. supply lines to Europe or deploy its nuclear submarines to the American coast, it must pass through this needle's eye. Controlling Greenland allows NATO to plug the hole with sonar arrays and maritime patrol aircraft. Without Greenland, the Atlantic becomes a playground for hostile subsurface fleets. But Greenland's military value extends far beyond the Navy. 700 miles north of the Arctic Circle sits the Pituffik Space Base, formerly known as Thule. Built in secret during the 1950s, it represents the absolute front line of the American homeland defense. Its massive radar system is designed to peer over the curvature of the Earth right across the North Pole. It is the first line of defense against an intercontinental ballistic missile attack. In a world of hypersonic weapons and renewed nuclear tension, this frozen radar is more relevant than ever. For the United States, losing influence here doesn't just mean a diplomatic retreat. It means a literal hole in the shield protecting Washington and New York. For China or Russia, gaining even a small foothold on this island would be the equivalent of placing a dagger at the throat of the Atlantic Alliance. While the U.S. views Greenland through the lens of security, China views it through the lens of the great energy transition. Greenland is a geological anomaly. As its massive ice sheet, which is up to 3 kilometers thick, begins to recede due to a warming climate, it is revealing a treasure trove that could define the 21st century. We are talking about rare earth elements. Elements like neodymium, praseodymium, and dysprosium are the vitamins of the modern economy. They are essential for wind turbines, electric vehicles, and the guidance systems of precision-guided munitions. Currently, China controls nearly 90% of the global supply chain for these metals. This gives Beijing a green veto over the Western economy. Greenland, however, holds the Kvanefjeld deposit in the south. This site is believed to be one of the largest undeveloped rare earth sources on the planet. Beijing's strategy is subtle but persistent. China has officially labeled itself a near-Arctic state. Through state-owned enterprises, China has repeatedly offered to build massive infrastructure projects. International airports in Nuuk and Ilulissat, deep water ports, and massive mining facilities. In 2018, It took a direct intervention from the Danish government backed by a frantic US State Department to stop a Chinese company from winning the contract to build Greenland's airports. Washington realized that if Beijing owns the infrastructure, they effectively own the island's access to the world. For Russia, the Arctic is not just a strategic frontier, it is a national bank. Approximately 20% of Russia's GDP is generated north of the Arctic Circle. But Moscow's most ambitious project is the Northern Sea Route. As the ice thins, this route becomes a viable alternative to the Suez Canal. It cuts the transit time from Shanghai to Rotterdam by nearly 40%. Russia has spent the last decade remilitarizing the north. They have reopened over 50 Soviet-era military outposts. Greenland sits directly on the western flank of this Arctic bastion. The accession of Sweden and Finland to NATO has fundamentally changed the geography of Northern Europe. The Baltic Sea is now a NATO lake, forcing Moscow to rely even more heavily on its northern fleet. In this new reality, Greenland becomes the high ground of the North Atlantic. If the Arctic becomes a theater of war, Greenland will be the base from which NATO launches its Arctic strike capabilities to counter Russian dominance over the polar routes. Finally, we must address the most overlooked players in this game: the 56,000 residents of Greenland. Nuuk has a dream: total independence from the Kingdom of Denmark. Currently, Greenland remains dependent on Copenhagen for a $500 million annual block grant. Without it, the island's economy would collapse overnight. To achieve true sovereignty, Nuuk needs a massive influx of capital to replace Danish subsidies. This creates a dangerous geopolitical bidding war. If Nuuk accepts Chinese investment, it risks falling into a debt trap, where its resources and ports are signed away to Beijing for 99 years. If it leans too heavily into the US military embrace, it risks becoming a mere protectorate of Washington, trading one master for another. The tragic irony is this: the more Greenland strives for independence, the more it becomes a pawn in a game played by giants. Giants who are less interested in the welfare of the Inuit and more interested in the minerals beneath their feet and the radars on their mountains. Greenland is the ultimate reminder that in modern geopolitics, there are no empty spaces. The Arctic is no longer a peripheral wasteland. It is a central arena of the 21st century. Geography, once again, triumphs over ideology. The battle for the island of ice is about who will dictate the rules of the world as the planet's roof continues to melt. Greenland's fate may well determine whether the Arctic remains a zone of cooperation or becomes the spark for a new, colder, and more dangerous global confrontation. Thank you for watching. If you found this analysis valuable, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the strategies that shape our world. We're just getting started. Until next time.